The storm that hit Minneapolis that October night wasn't supposed to be anything special, just another autumn downpour, the kind that washes the fallen leaves into storm drains and sends people scurrying for cover. But for Marcus Rodriguez, huddled beneath the concrete overpass near the Northside Industrial District, it became the night that changed everything. What started as a simple act of kindness, helping a lost 7-year-old girl find her way home, would set in motion a chain of events that neither he nor anyone else could have predicted. By the time the sun rose the next morning, a private jet would be touching down at the Henderson family shelter, and Marcus would discover that sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding those who expect nothing in return. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had been living under the Interstate 94 overpass for 3 months when the storm hit. The concrete structure provided decent shelter from most weather, and the city maintenance crews rarely bothered anyone who kept to themselves. At 42, he'd learned to make himself invisible in a world that preferred not to see him. His military-issued duffel bag contained everything he owned: a sleeping bag that had seen better days, a few changes of clothes, some canned food, and a small American flag that he'd carried through 2 tours in Afghanistan. The October air had turned sharp that evening, carrying with it the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Marcus had spent the day walking through downtown Minneapolis, stopping at various businesses to ask about work. A few restaurant managers had been kind enough to offer him day-old pastries or leftover coffee, but no one was hiring. His worn appearance and the gaps in his employment history made him an easy rejection. He'd served his country for 8 years, rising to the rank of Staff Sergeant in the Army's 82nd Airborne Division. His service record was exemplary: 3 commendations for bravery, a Purple Heart from an IED explosion outside Kandahar, and the respect of every soldier who'd served under him. But none of that mattered much when you were trying to explain why you'd been sleeping rough for the better part of a year. The transition back to civilian life had been brutal. The nightmares came first, followed by the drinking. Then came the job losses, the missed rent payments, and finally the eviction notice that had landed him on the streets. The VA had wait lists for everything: housing assistance, mental health services, job training programs. Marcus had filled out so many forms and sat in so many waiting rooms that he'd eventually given up trying to navigate the system. As darkness fell that Tuesday evening, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. Marcus pulled his worn army jacket tighter around his shoulders and settled in for the night. He'd positioned himself near the eastern support pillar, where the concrete provided the best protection from the elements. The traffic overhead created a constant rumble, but he'd grown accustomed to the sound. It was better than the silence, which tended to bring back memories he'd rather forget. The first drops of rain began falling around 9 o'clock. What started as a light drizzle quickly intensified into a steady downpour. Marcus retrieved a plastic tarp from his duffel bag and draped it over himself, creating a makeshift tent. The rain drummed against the concrete above, creating an echo that reverberated through the space beneath the overpass. It was nearly 10:30 when he heard the crying. At first, Marcus thought it might be an animal, a cat or injured bird, but as he listened more carefully, he realized it was a child. The sound was coming from somewhere nearby, but the rain and traffic noise made it difficult to pinpoint the exact location. He pushed aside his tarp and stepped out into the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, creating small rivers that flowed toward the storm drains. Marcus squinted through the downpour, scanning the area around the overpass. The crying seemed to be coming from the direction of the old warehouse district, where a cluster of abandoned buildings lined the street. He found her huddled behind a rusted dumpster, soaked to the skin and shivering uncontrollably. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with dark hair plastered to her head and tears streaming down her face. She wore a pink raincoat that had long since given up trying to keep her dry, and her small hands were wrapped around a stuffed elephant that looked as miserable as she did. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, approaching slowly so as not to frighten her further. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" The girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I can't find my mum," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Over the rain. I've been looking everywhere, but I can't find her." Marcus knelt down beside her, his own discomfort forgotten. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she replied, clutching her stuffed elephant tighter. "Emma Chen. My mom said to wait by the blue car, but when I came back she wasn't there anymore." Marcus looked around the deserted street. There were no blue cars in sight, no lights in any of the surrounding buildings. "How long have you been out here, Emma?" "I don't know," she said, starting to cry again. "It was still sunny when I got lost. I've been walking and walking, but everything looks the same." Marcus felt his heart clench. This little girl had been wandering the streets for hours, probably since late afternoon. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her lips were already turning blue from the cold. He needed to get her somewhere warm and dry, but he also needed to be careful. A homeless man, approaching a lost child in the middle of the night, he knew how that would look to anyone who saw them. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, taking off his jacket and wrapping it around her small shoulders. "My name is Marcus, and I'm going to help you find your mum. But first we need to get you somewhere warm and safe. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, though her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. Marcus picked her up, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. She couldn't weigh more than 50 pounds, and her small body was trembling with cold and fear. Marcus carried Emma back to his makeshift shelter under the overpass. It wasn't much, but it was dry and offered protection from the wind. He set her down gently on his sleeping bag and wrapped his tarp around both of them. Emma's breathing was shallow and rapid, and Marcus was worried she might be going into shock. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked, examining her for any obvious injuries. Apart from some scrapes on her knees and hands, she appeared to be physically unharmed. "I'm just cold," Emma whispered, "and scared. I want my mom." Marcus opened his duffel bag and pulled out a clean t-shirt. "Let's get you out of these wet clothes," he said. "You'll feel better once you're dry." Emma was too exhausted and cold to protest. Marcus helped her change into his dry t-shirt, which hung on her like a dress. He then wrapped her in his sleeping bag and held her close, trying to share his body. Heat. Gradually, her shivering began to subside. "Tell me about your mom," Marcus said, hoping to keep Emma calm and get more information that might help locate her family. "What's her name?" "Susan Chen," Emma replied, her voice stronger now that she was warming up. "She's a doctor at the hospital. We were at the farmer's market downtown, and she told me to wait by her car while she went to get something from another vendor, but when I came back from the bathroom, the car was gone." Marcus frowned. "The farmer's market closes at 5 o'clock. That was hours ago." "I know," Emma said, tears starting to flow again. "I waited and waited, but she never came back. Then I started walking, trying to find her, but I got lost. Everything looks different in the dark." Marcus's mind raced. There had to be more to this story. No mother would simply abandon her child at a farmer's market. Something must have happened. An emergency at the hospital, perhaps, or some kind of family crisis that had forced Susan Chen to leave unexpectedly. "Emma, do you know your mum's phone number?" Marcus asked. Emma shook her head. "She has it programmed in my phone, but I dropped it somewhere when I was running from the rain." Marcus felt a growing sense of urgency. This little girl had been missing for hours, and her mother was probably frantic with worry. The police would be looking for her, and every minute that passed increased the danger. But Marcus also knew that calling the authorities would likely result in his own arrest, or at least detention for questioning. A homeless veteran found with a missing child. The optics were terrible, regardless of his intentions. Still, Emma's safety was more important than his own concerns. He needed to get her to safety and reunite her with her family, whatever the cost to himself. "Emma, I'm going to try to help you find your mom," Marcus said. "But we can't stay here all night. We need to get you somewhere warm and safe where people can help look for her." Emma nodded, though Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. "I don't want to be alone." Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. This scared little girl was depending on him, trusting him to keep her safe. It was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. "I'll stay with you as long as I can," he promised. "But first, we need to get you some help." Marcus began to formulate a plan. The Henderson family shelter was about 6 blocks away, and they would be open all night. The staff there knew him. He'd eaten meals there occasionally, and had always been treated with respect. If he could get Emma there safely, they could contact the authorities and begin the process of reuniting her with her family. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, the rain was coming down harder than before, and the wind was picking up. Marcus looked at Emma, who had fallen asleep wrapped in his sleeping bag, clutching her stuffed elephant. Her face was peaceful now, no longer marked by fear and tears. Marcus made his decision. He carefully gathered his few belongings, stuffing them into his duffel bag. Then he gently woke Emma. "Come on, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're going to go somewhere warm, where there are people who can help us find your mom." Emma rubbed her eyes and sat up. "Where are we going?" "There's a place not far from here where they help people," Marcus explained. "They'll have warm food and dry clothes, and they can call the police to help look for your mom." Emma seemed to accept this explanation. Marcus helped her to her feet and wrapped his jacket around her again. It was still several sizes too big, but it provided some protection from the elements. The walk to the Henderson family shelter was treacherous. The streets were flooded in places, and the rain made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Marcus carried Emma most of the way, his boots splashing through puddles and his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Every few blocks, he would stop to rest and check on Emma, making sure she wasn't getting too cold or wet. By the time they reached the shelter, both of them were soaked through, despite Marcus's efforts to keep Emma dry. The Henderson family shelter occupied a converted warehouse in the warehouse district, its bright yellow sign visible even through the rain. Warm light spilled from the windows, and Marcus could see people moving around inside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe too. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus hesitated at the entrance. Once he walked through those doors with Emma, there would be no going back. The authorities would be called, questions would be asked, and his simple life under the overpass would be over. But looking down at Emma's trusting face, he knew there was no other choice. The shelter's main room was warm and brightly lit, filled with tables and chairs where people were eating late-night meals or playing cards. A television in the corner was tuned to the local news, and Marcus could hear the weather report warning of continued storms throughout the night. Several staff members were moving around the room, checking on residents and cleaning up after the evening meal. Marcus approached the front desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes was sorting through paperwork. Her name tag read, "Patricia Williams, night supervisor." "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from the cold and rain. "I need your help. I found this little girl lost in the storm, and she's been separated from her mother." Patricia looked up from her paperwork, her eyes immediately focusing on Emma. "Oh my goodness," she said, coming around the desk. "Honey, are you all right?" Emma nodded, though she pressed closer to Marcus. "I can't find my mom," she said in a small voice. Patricia's expression shifted from concern to urgency. "Marcus, isn't it?" she said, recognizing him from his previous visits. "Tell me exactly what happened." Marcus quickly explained how he'd found Emma behind the dumpster, her story about being separated from her mother at the farmer's market, and their journey to the shelter. Patricia listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "We need to call the police immediately," Patricia said when Marcus finished his account. "There's probably an Amber Alert out for this little girl." As if on cue, the television in the corner caught Marcus's attention. The local news was running a breaking story about a missing child. Emma's school photo filled the screen, along with a description of her clothing and the circumstances of her disappearance. Emma Chen, age 7, was last seen at the downtown Minneapolis Farmers Market around 4:30 this afternoon, the news anchor was saying. Police say the girl became separated from her mother, Dr. Susan Chen, who is a pediatric surgeon at Minneapolis General Hospital. Dr. Chen was called away on a medical emergency and became delayed in returning to the market. When she arrived, back at the location where she had left her daughter, Emma was nowhere to be found. The story continued with details about the massive search effort that had been underway for hours. Police, firefighters, and volunteers had been combing the downtown area, but the storm had hampered their efforts. Dr. Chen was described as distraught and was pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Emma's mother hadn't abandoned her. She'd been called away in an emergency and had returned to find her daughter missing. It explained everything, and it meant that Emma would soon be reunited with her family. Patricia was already on the phone with the police, providing them with the shelter's address and explaining the situation. Within minutes, Marcus could hear the sound of sirens approaching through the storm. Emma looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. "Are those for me?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus replied, kneeling down to her level. "Those are people coming to help take you back to your mom." Emma threw her arms around Marcus's neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. "Thank you for keeping me safe." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, the first tears he'd shed in months. This little girl's simple gratitude meant more to him than any medal or commendation he'd ever received. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd done something that truly mattered. The first police officer through the door was Detective Sarah Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the Minneapolis Police Department. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had handled countless missing child cases, her eyes immediately scanning the room before settling on Emma and Marcus. "Is this our missing girl?" she asked Patricia, though her attention was already focused on Emma, who was still wrapped in Marcus's oversized jacket. "Emma Chen, age 7, Patricia confirmed. "This is Marcus Rodriguez, the gentleman who found her and brought her to safety." Detective Martinez knelt down to Emma's level, her voice gentle but professional. "Hi, Emma. I'm Detective Martinez. Your mom is very worried about you, and she's on her way here right now. Can you tell me what happened today?" Emma's account was remarkably clear for a 7-year-old who had been through such an ordeal. She explained about the farmer's market, waiting by the blue Honda Civic, going to the bathroom, and returning to find the car gone. Her mother had always told her to stay put if she ever got lost, so she had waited by the parking spot for what felt like hours before finally deciding to look for help. "I walked and walked, but I couldn't find anyone," Emma said, her small hand still holding onto Marcus's sleeve. "Then it started raining really hard and I got scared. I hid behind a big metal thing, and that's when Marcus found me." Detective Martinez made notes as Emma spoke, but Marcus could see her stealing glances at him. He knew what she was thinking. What was a homeless man doing in that part of the city, and why had he been the one to find Emma? The questions were natural, even expected, but they still made Marcus uncomfortable. "Mr. Rodriguez," Detective Martinez said, turning her attention to him. "Can you walk me through exactly what happened from your perspective?" Marcus recounted the evening's events, sticking to the facts and avoiding any unnecessary details. He explained about hearing the crying, finding Emma behind the dumpster, bringing her to his shelter to get her warm and dry, and then making the decision to bring her to the Henderson family shelter. "You did the right thing," Detective Martinez said when he finished. "Getting her out of that storm probably saved her life. Hypothermia can set in quickly, especially in a child that small." Before Marcus could respond, the shelter's front door burst open and a woman rushed in, her hospital scrubs still visible beneath a hastily thrown-on coat. Dr. Susan Chen was a petite woman in her mid-30s with the same dark hair as her daughter and eyes red from crying. "Emma!" she cried, spotting her daughter immediately. "Mommy!" Emma broke away from Marcus and ran to her mother, who swept her up in a fierce embrace. Both of them were crying now, holding each other as if they'd never let go. Marcus watched the reunion with a mixture of relief and something he couldn't quite identify. He'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. Emma was safe, and she was back with her mother. His part in this story was over. Dr. Chen carried Emma to a nearby chair, checking her over with the practiced eye of a pediatrician. "Are you hurt, baby? Are you cold? I was so scared when I couldn't find you." "I'm okay, Mommy," Emma said, though. She was still crying. "Marcus took care of me. He kept me warm and brought me here." Dr. Chen looked up, her eyes searching the room until they found Marcus. He was standing near the wall, trying to blend into the background, but her gaze locked onto his immediately. "You're Marcus?" she asked, standing up and walking toward him, Emma still in her arms. Marcus nodded, suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. His wet hair was plastered to his head, his clothes were soaked through, and he probably smelled like the streets. This woman was clearly successful, educated, probably made more money in a month than he'd seen in years. Yet she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I don't know how to thank you," Dr. Chen said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I got the call that Emma was missing, I thought—" She paused, unable to finish the sentence. "You saved my daughter's life." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same thing," he said quietly. "No, Doctor," Chen said firmly. "Not everyone would have. You could have just kept walking. You could have assumed someone else would help, but you didn't. You put yourself at risk to save a child you'd never met." Detective Martinez cleared her throat. "Dr. Chen, I need to ask you a few questions about what happened today. Emma's given us her account, but I'd like to hear your side as well." "Doctor." Chen's expression tightened. "I was called into emergency surgery. A 12-year-old boy had been in a car accident, and I was the only pediatric surgeon available. I told Emma to wait by the car, that I'd be back in just a few minutes. But the surgery took longer than expected, nearly 3 hours. When I finally got back to the market, everything was closed, and Emma was gone." "Why didn't you call someone?" "To stay with Emma?" Detective Martinez asked. "There wasn't time," Dr. Chen said, her voice defensive. "The boy was dying. I had maybe 30 seconds to make a decision. I thought Emma would be safe in the car for a few minutes. I never imagined I'd be gone for hours." Marcus could see the guilt written across Dr. Chen's face. She was a doctor, trained to save lives, and she'd been faced with an impossible choice: save a dying child or stay with her own daughter. She'd chosen to save the child, but it had nearly cost her everything. "Dr. Chen," Detective Martinez said gently, "I understand the position you were in, but in the future you need to have a backup plan for situations like this. Emma could have been seriously hurt." "I know," Dr. Chen whispered. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for putting her in danger." Emma reached up and touched her mother's face. "It's okay, Mommy. You saved that boy, right? That's what doctors do." Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Again. Yes, baby. We saved him. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more people, Dr. Chen's parents, who had been part of the search effort, and a social worker who needed to document the incident. The shelter's main room became crowded with officials and family members, all wanting to hear the story and make sure Emma was truly safe. Through it all, Marcus stood quietly in the background, feeling increasingly out of place. His job was done. Emma was safe, her family was reunited, and the authorities had everything they needed. He began to inch toward the door, thinking he could slip away unnoticed. "Where are you going?" Emma's voice stopped him in his tracks. The entire room turned to look at him, and Marcus felt his face flush. "I should get going," he said awkwardly. "Let you folks get back to your family." "Wait," Dr. Chen said, standing up. "I haven't had a chance to properly thank you. And Emma's right. Where are you going? Back out into the storm?" Marcus shrugged. "I'll be fine. The rain's letting up." "No," Dr. Chen said firmly. "Absolutely not. You're soaked to the bone, and you've been taking care of my daughter all night. The least I can do is make sure you have somewhere warm and dry to sleep." "Dr. Chen, that's not necessary," Marcus began. "It's Susan," she interrupted. "And yes, it is necessary. Patricia, does the shelter have space for Marcus tonight?" Patricia nodded. "Of course. We always have room for someone who needs it." Marcus wanted to protest, but he could see the determination in Susan's eyes. This wasn't just about charity or guilt. She genuinely wanted to help him, just as he had helped Emma. "Thank you," he said simply. Susan spent the next hour filling out paperwork and talking with the authorities. Emma had been checked over by a paramedic and declared to be in good health, though she would need to be monitored for any signs of trauma or delayed shock. The social worker took statements from everyone involved and made notes about the incident, but it was clear that no charges would be filed. Marcus's actions had been those of a good Samaritan, nothing more. As the official business wound down, Susan found herself drawn back to Marcus. He was sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee that Patricia had brought him, looking tired and overwhelmed by all the attention. "Marcus," she said, sitting down across from him, "can I ask you something?" He nodded, though he looked wary. "Emma told me you're a veteran. Is that true?" Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Army, 8 years. Where did you serve?" "Afghanistan, mostly. 2 tours. Susan nodded thoughtfully. "My brother served in Afghanistan. He came back. Changed. It took him a long time to readjust." Marcus didn't respond, but Susan could see something shift in his expression. "I don't know your story," Susan continued, "and I'm not going to pry, but I want you to know that what you did tonight, the way you took care of Emma, the way you put her safety above your own concerns, that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes guarded. "I'm not looking for charity, Dr. Chen." "Susan," she corrected, "and I'm not offering charity. I'm offering gratitude. There's a difference." Before Marcus could respond, Emma appeared at his side, her stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. "Marcus," she said, climbing onto the chair next to him, "my mom says you don't have a house. Is that true?" Marcus glanced at Susan, who nodded encouragingly. "That's right, sweetheart. I don't have a house right now." "Well, you can stay with us," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We have a big house and there's lots of room." Marcus smiled despite himself. "That's very kind of you, Emma, but I can't do that." "Why not?" Marcus struggled to find an answer that would make sense to a 7-year-old. Because sometimes grown-ups have complicated situations that make things difficult." Emma frowned, clearly not satisfied with this explanation. She turned to her mother. "Mommy, can't Marcus stay with us? He saved me." Susan looked at Marcus, then at her daughter, then back at Marcus. An idea was forming in her mind, something that might help both of them. "Emma, why don't you go sit with Grandma and Grandpa for a few minutes? I need to talk to Marcus about something." Emma reluctantly climbed down from the chair and walked over to where her grandparents were waiting. Susan waited until she was out of earshot before speaking. "Marcus, I have a proposition for you," she said quietly. "I know you don't want charity, so I'm not offering it. I'm offering you a job." Marcus stared at Susan across the table, certain he had misheard her. "A job?" "Yes," Susan said, leaning forward slightly. "I've been thinking about this for months, actually. Ever since my brother came back from his deployment, he struggled with a lot of the same issues that many veterans face. Finding work, dealing with PTSD, adjusting to civilian life." Marcus remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I run a small non-profit organization on the side," Susan continued. "It's called Second Chances Veteran Services. We help veterans transition back into civilian life by providing job training, counseling referrals, and temporary housing assistance. But we've been missing something crucial. Someone who actually understands what these veterans are going through." "Dr. Chen." "Susan," Marcus said carefully, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not exactly management material." "I'm not looking for management," Susan replied. "I'm looking for someone who can connect with these veterans on a level that I never could. Someone who's been where they are, who understands the challenges they're facing. Someone who can look them in the eye and say, 'I've been there and there's a way through this.'" Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "You don't understand. I'm not a success story. I'm living proof that the system doesn't work." "Ah, you?" Susan asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, I see a man who risked his own safety to save a child he'd never met. I see someone who put her needs above his own concerns, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That's not failure, Marcus. That's exactly the kind of person I need working with these veterans." Before Marcus could respond, Emma came, running back over, followed by her grandparents. Dr. Chen's father was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, while her mother was a petite woman who bore a strong resemblance to Susan. "Mom, Dad, this is Marcus Rodriguez," Susan said, standing to make introductions. "Marcus, these are my parents, Dr. James Chen and Margaret Chen." Dr. James Chen extended his hand, which Marcus shook hesitantly. "Mr. Rodriguez, I can't begin to express our gratitude. You saved our granddaughter's life tonight." "He's being modest," Margaret Chen added, her eyes warm with genuine appreciation. "Emma has told us all about how you took care of her, kept her warm, and brought her to safety. You're a hero." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Dr. James Chen said firmly, "not everyone would have done what you did. You saw a child in need and acted without hesitation, even though it could have complicated your own situation. That takes courage. And character." Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Marcus, are you coming home with us?" Marcus looked at Susan, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Emma, I think Marcus needs some time to think about our conversation, but he's going to stay here at the shelter tonight, where it's warm and safe. Can we come visit him tomorrow?" Emma asked. "If Marcus is okay with that," Susan replied, looking at him questioningly. Marcus found himself nodding, though he wasn't sure why. Something about this family's genuine kindness was breaking down walls he'd built up over months of rejection and indifference. "I'd like that," he said softly. The Chen family left shortly after, but not before Susan pressed a business card into Marcus's hand. "Think about what I said," she told him. "The job offer is real, and it's not charity. It's a chance to make a real difference in people's lives." Marcus spent the night in a real bed for the first time in months. The shelter's dormitory was basic but clean, and the warm shower he'd taken before bed had felt like a luxury. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Susan's offer. Could he really work with other veterans? Did he have anything valuable to offer them? He'd spent so long thinking of himself as a failure that the idea of being helpful to others seemed almost foreign. But something about the way Susan had looked at him, not with pity, but with respect, made him wonder if maybe she saw something in him that he'd forgotten was there. The next morning, brought crisp autumn sunshine and the bustle of the shelter's breakfast service. Marcus ate quietly at a corner table, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. His entire world had shifted, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Marcus. Patricia Williams approached his table with a warm smile. "There's someone here to see you." Marcus looked up to see Emma bouncing through the shelter's entrance, followed by Susan carrying a large paper bag. Emma was wearing a bright yellow dress with matching ribbons in her hair, looking completely recovered from her ordeal. "Marcus!" Emma ran over and hugged him tightly. "I told Mommy we had to come early because I missed you." Susan set the bag on the table and sat down across from Marcus. "I brought breakfast," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten yet." The bag contained fresh bagels, cream cheese, coffee, and orange juice. Simple food, but prepared with care. Marcus realized it had been a long time since someone had brought him a meal that wasn't from a charity kitchen or a dumpster. "Thank you," he said, meaning it. As they ate, Susan talked about her non-profit organization, Second Chances. Veteran Services operated out of a small office building in downtown Minneapolis and served approximately 50 veterans at any given time. They provided job training in various fields, helped with resume writing and interview skills, offered financial literacy classes, and maintained a network of employers who were willing to hire veterans. "The challenge," Susan explained, "is that many of these veterans don't trust the system anymore. They've been let down too many times, filled out too many forms, sat through too many meetings that led nowhere. They need someone who understands that frustration, someone who can speak their language." Marcus found himself nodding. "The VE has good intentions," he said, "but it's a bureaucracy. By the time you navigate all the red tape, you've given up hope." "Exactly," Susan said. "That's why I think you'd be perfect for this role. You wouldn't be pushing paperwork or giving people false hope. You'd be showing them that it's possible to come back from rock bottom." Emma looked up from her bagel. "What's rock bottom?" Susan smiled at her daughter. "It's when things are really, really hard, sweetheart. But Marcus shows us that even when things are hard, they can get better." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to being seen as an example of hope rather than failure. "What would the job actually involve?" he asked. "Initially, you'd work with me to develop programs specifically for homeless veterans," Susan explained. "We'd start with a pilot program, maybe 10 or 12 veterans who are living on the streets. You'd help connect them with services, provide peer counseling, and assist with job placement." "I don't have any formal training in counseling," Marcus pointed out. "You have something better," Susan replied. "You have lived experience. You know what it's like to lose everything and still find the strength to help someone else. That's worth more than any degree." Marcus thought about the other veterans he'd encountered during his time on the streets, men and women who'd served their country with honor, only to find themselves forgotten and abandoned when they returned home. Some had addiction issues, others struggled with mental health problems, and many simply couldn't find work that paid enough to afford housing in an increasingly expensive city. "How would you find something like this?" Marcus asked. "We've got a grant from the city and some private donors," Susan said. "But honestly, the funding isn't the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is finding staff who can truly connect with this population, people who won't judge them or talk down to them." Emma had finished her breakfast and was now coloring in a book she'd brought with her. She looked up at Marcus with serious eyes. "Are you going to help other people like you help me?" Marcus looked at this little girl who had somehow become his motivation for everything. Her simple question cut through all his doubts and fears. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I am." Susan's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire appearance. "Really? You'll consider the position?" "I'll do more than consider it," Marcus said, feeling something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. I'll take it. Emma clapped her hands together. Yay! Marcus is going to help people. Susan reached across the table and shook Marcus's hand. Welcome to Second Chances Veterans Services. When can you start? Marcus looked around the shelter, at the life he'd been living, and then at the possibilities that lay ahead. How about tomorrow? Perfect, Susan said. But first, we need to get you set up with temporary housing and some proper work clothes. The organization has an emergency fund for exactly this purpose. I don't want to be a charity case, Marcus said, his old defensiveness returning. You're not, Susan assured him. You're an employee. This is standard practice for anyone starting a new job. We provide temporary housing assistance until you get your first paycheck and can find your own place. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. For the first time in over a year, he was going to be something other than homeless. He was going to have a purpose, a chance to help other veterans who were struggling just as he had been. Emma reached over and took his hand. Don't be sad, Marcus. This is happy news. Marcus squeezed her small hand gently. You're right, sweetheart. This is very happy news. As they prepared to leave the shelter, Marcus took one last look around the place that had provided him with safety during his darkest hour. He thought about the man who had walked through those doors the night before. Desperate, hopeless, convinced that his life was over. That man was gone now, replaced by someone who had remembered what it felt like to matter, to make a difference, to have hope for the future. And it had all started with a little girl crying in the rain. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his new studio apartment, adjusting the collar of his button-down shirt. The face looking back at him was almost unrecognizable, clean-shaven, well-rested, with eyes that held something they hadn't possessed in months. Purpose. The apartment wasn't much. A converted warehouse space in the arts district with exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures. But it was his. The rent was partially subsidized through Second Chances Veterans Services for the first 6 months, giving him time to establish himself in his new role. After years of carrying everything he owned in a duffel bag, having an actual address felt surreal. His first day at the office had been overwhelming. Susan had introduced him to the small but dedicated staff. Maria Santos, a former social worker who handled case management. David Kim, a grants specialist who kept the funding flowing. And Janet Thompson, a volunteer coordinator who managed the network of community partners. They'd welcomed him warmly, but Marcus could see the questions in their eyes. Could this formerly homeless veteran really helped turn other people's lives around? The pilot program Susan had described was already taking shape. They'd identified 12 homeless veterans through outreach efforts at shelters, soup kitchens, and known encampments around the city. Each had a different story: combat trauma, addiction, job loss, medical debt, but they all shared the common thread of having served their country and then fallen through the cracks of civilian society. Marcus's first assignment was to simply make contact. No forms to fill out, no requirements to meet, just conversation. Build trust first, Susan had told him. Everything else comes later. His initial attempts had been met with suspicion and hostility. Veterans who had been disappointed by the system countless times weren't eager to trust another program, regardless of who was running it. But Marcus persisted, showing up consistently at the places where homeless veterans gathered, offering coffee and conversation without any strings attached. The breakthrough came during his second week, when he encountered Tommy Brennan sitting on a bench outside the downtown library. Tommy was roughly Marcus's age, with the weathered look of someone who'd been living rough for an extended period. His army jacket bore the patches of the 101st Airborne Division. "Screaming Eagles," Marcus had said, nodding toward the patch. Tommy looked up suspiciously. "Yeah, so I was 82nd Airborne myself, Afghanistan, 2018 to 2020. Something shifted in Tommy's expression. No kidding. What unit? For the next hour, they talked about military life, deployment experiences, and the challenges of coming home. Tommy had been living on the streets for 8 months after losing his job as a security guard. A series of panic attacks, triggered by loud noises and crowds, had made it impossible for him to work in most environments. The VA says I need to get on a waiting list for therapy, Tommy had explained. But the list is 6 months long, and I need help now. Can't exactly give them a mailing address, you know? Marcus nodded, understanding completely. What if I told you there might be another way? That conversation had led to Tommy becoming the first veteran enrolled in their pilot program. Within a week, they'd helped him get temporary housing in a transitional living facility and connected him with a therapist who specialized in veteran trauma. More importantly, Marcus had convinced Tommy that seeking help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a tactical decision, like any other military strategy. Word spread quickly through the veteran community that there was someone new working with. Second chances, someone who actually understood their situation. One by one, other veterans began approaching Marcus, curious about this program that didn't require them to jump through endless bureaucratic hoops. By the end of his 3rd week, Marcus had enrolled 8 of the 12 targeted veterans in various services. Some needed job training, others required addiction counseling, and a few just needed help navigating the complex web of veteran benefits they were entitled to but had never been able to access. Susan had been impressed by his progress, but Marcus knew the real test was still coming. It was one thing to connect veterans with services, it was another to help them maintain stability over the long term. Recovery was rarely a straight line, and setbacks were common. That morning, as Marcus prepared for another day at the office, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Tommy Brennan's number. "Marcus, I need help." Tommy's voice was shaky, barely controlled panic evident in his tone. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, already reaching for his keys. "I can't do this anymore. The apartment they got me. There's construction next door. All day long it's hammering and drilling and machinery. It sounds like incoming fire. I haven't slept in 3 days." Marcus could hear the desperation in Tommy's voice. This was exactly the kind of crisis that could derail a veteran's progress and send them back to the streets. "Tommy, listen to me," Marcus said calmly. "Where are you right now?" "I'm in the parking lot outside my building. I packed my stuff. I was going to leave, but I thought maybe I should call you first." "You did the right thing," Marcus assured him. "Stay right where you are. I'm coming to you." Marcus drove across the city with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt since his military days. This was why Susan had hired him, not just to enroll veterans in programs, but to be there during the moments when everything threatened to fall apart. He found Tommy sitting on a curb next to a beat-up Honda Civic, a duffel bag at his feet. The construction noise from the adjacent building was indeed overwhelming, a constant barrage of industrial sounds that would be triggering for anyone with combat-related PTSD. "This was a mistake," Tommy said as Marcus approached. "I'm not cut out for civilian life. I should just go back to the camps." Marcus sat down next to him on the curb. "You know what I was doing 3 weeks ago?" Tommy shook his head. "I was living under an overpass, convinced that my life was over. I thought I was broken beyond repair, that the system had failed me and I had failed myself." "What changed?" Tommy asked. "I found a little girl lost in a storm," Marcus said. "And in helping her, I remembered something I'd forgotten, that I still had value, that I could still make a difference." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I'm calling Susan. We're going to find you a different place to stay, somewhere quiet. And I'm going to stay with you today until we get it sorted out." "You'd do that?" Tommy asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Tommy, you called me instead of just disappearing. That tells me you want this to work. And if you want it to work, then I'm going to make sure it works." Within 2 hours, Susan had arranged for Tommy to move to a different transitional housing facility in a quieter part of the city. Marcus helped him relocate his few belongings and made sure he was settled before leaving. "Why are you doing this?" Tommy asked as Marcus prepared to go. "I mean, what's in it for you?" Marcus thought about the question for a moment. "You know how they say that veterans never leave a man behind?" Tommy nodded. "Well, the war might be over, but we're still veterans. And you're not behind enemy lines anymore. You're behind poverty lines, behind bureaucracy lines, behind lines of people who don't understand what you've been through. But the principle is the same. I'm not leaving you behind." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "Nobody's ever said anything like that to me before." "Then you haven't been around the right people," Marcus replied. "But you are now." That evening, Marcus returned to his apartment emotionally drained but oddly energized. He'd prevented a veteran from giving up and returning to the streets, but more than that, he'd discovered something about himself. The leadership skills he'd developed in the military, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to problem-solve quickly, to inspire others to persevere, those skills weren't lost. They'd just been dormant, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. His phone buzzed with a text message from Susan. "Heard about Tommy. Great work today. This is exactly why we needed you." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Just getting started." As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about how dramatically his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He had a home, a job, and most importantly, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. But the real transformation wasn't in his external circumstances. It was in how he saw himself. He was no longer Marcus Rodriguez, the failed veteran living under a bridge. He was Marcus Rodriguez, peer counselor and advocate, someone who could look other struggling veterans in the eye and say with complete honesty, "I've been where you are, and there's a way through this. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." There were still 4 veterans. He hadn't yet enrolled in the program, and he knew that each one would have their own unique barriers to overcome. But for the first time in over a year, Marcus was looking forward to tomorrow. He thought about Emma, who had started visiting him at the office once a week after school. She'd appointed herself as the unofficial mascot of Second Chances Veterans Services, bringing homemade cookies and drawings that Marcus hung on his office wall. Her mother had created a monster. Emma now wanted to help everyone she met, convinced that the world was full of people just waiting for someone to care about them. Maybe she was right. 6 weeks into his new role, Marcus was beginning to understand the true scope of the veteran homelessness crisis in Minneapolis. What had started as a pilot program for 12 veterans had evolved into something much larger. Word was spreading through the veteran community that Second Chances Veterans Services actually delivered on its promises, and veterans were seeking them out from across the Twin Cities metro area. The organization's small office space had become inadequate. Veterans would show up throughout the day, sometimes just to talk, other times needing immediate assistance with everything from medical appointments to court dates. Susan had started looking for larger facilities, but good locations were expensive, and their current funding could only stretch so far. Marcus had developed a routine that took him throughout the city. Mornings were spent at the office, conducting intake interviews and coordinating services. Afternoons found him at various locations where homeless veterans gathered: the VA Medical Center, local libraries, community centers, and sometimes the camps hidden beneath overpasses and in abandoned lots. It was during one of these afternoon rounds that Marcus encountered Angela Foster. She was sitting alone in Riverside Park, feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons from a paper bag. Her military bearing was evident despite her worn civilian clothes, and Marcus noticed the faded Marine Corps tattoo on her forearm. "Semper Fi," Marcus said, approaching cautiously. Angela looked up with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Army?" she guessed, taking in his own bearing. Second Airborne," Marcus confirmed. Marcus Rodriguez. Angela Foster, 1st Marine Division. She studied him for a moment. You're the guy everyone's talking about. The one who's actually helping people instead of just pushing paperwork around. Marcus sat on the bench beside her. I will try. How long have you been out here? 4 months, Angela replied. Lost my job at the warehouse when I broke my leg. Workers' comp ran out before the bone healed properly. Couldn't make rent, got evicted. You know how it goes. Marcus did know. Angela's story was distressingly common. One injury, one missed paycheck, one unexpected expense that started a downward spiral. What kind of work were you doing? Forklift operator, inventory management. I was good at it too. 15 years. In the Corps, taught me about logistics and organization. But try explaining that to civilian employers when you're living out of your car. There was no self-pity in Angela's voice, just a matter-of-fact assessment of her situation. Marcus recognized the military pragmatism, focus on the tactical situation, not the emotions. Have you tried the VA for housing assistance? Marcus asked. Angela laughed bitterly. I've tried everything. VA says I make too much money from disability payments to qualify for emergency housing, but not enough to actually afford an apartment. It's a perfect catch-22. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Angela photos of the apartments where he'd helped place other veterans. What if I told you there might be another way? Over the next hour, Marcus learned Angela's full story. She'd served 3 tours overseas, including combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. She'd been injured by an IED explosion that left her with chronic pain and a slight limp, but she'd adapted and built a successful civilian career in logistics. The warehouse injury had been the final straw in a series of medical issues that had slowly eroded her financial stability. The thing is, Angela said, I don't just need housing. I need a job that understands my limitations. I can't stand for 8 hours straight anymore, and some days the pain is pretty intense. But I've got skills that are valuable, if someone's willing to look past the disability. Marcus's mind was racing. Angela wasn't just another veteran who needed services. She was someone who could potentially help provide services to others. Her logistics experience and understanding of military culture made her exactly the kind of person second chances veteran services needed as they expanded. Angela, what would you say if I offered you a job interview? She stared at him skeptically. Doing what? We're expanding our veteran outreach program. We need someone who understands supply chain management, who can help us coordinate services more efficiently. Someone who can also connect with female veterans, and there are more of them out here than most people realize. Angela was quiet for a long moment. You're serious? Dead serious. The pay isn't great to start, but it comes with housing assistance and full benefits, and you'd be helping other veterans who are dealing with the same challenges you faced. That evening, Marcus brought Angela to meet Susan at the Second Chances office. He'd called ahead to explain the situation, and Susan had agreed to an informal interview. Angela had cleaned up as best she could in a public restroom and borrowed a clean shirt from the clothes closet at a nearby shelter. Susan was immediately impressed by Angela's bearing and articulate description of her military experience. When Angela began outlining ideas for improving the organization's service coordination, Susan's eyes lit up with recognition of someone who could solve problems she didn't even know she had. Angela, we've been struggling with tracking outcomes. For our veterans, Susan explained, we help people get placed in housing and jobs, but we don't have good systems for following up to make sure they're maintaining stability. What would you recommend? Angela thought for a moment. In the Marines, we used a buddy system for accountability. You pair new veterans with someone who's been in the program longer. Weekly check-ins, informal mentoring, early intervention when problems arise. You could also implement a simple database system to track key metrics: housing retention, employment status, crisis incidents. Marcus watched Susan's expression as Angela spoke. This was exactly what he'd hoped would happen. Angela wasn't just asking for help. She was demonstrating her value as a potential team member. By the end of the meeting, Angela had been offered a position as program coordinator with responsibilities for outreach to female veterans and development of systematic follow-up procedures. Her starting salary would be enough to afford a modest apartment, and the organization would provide temporary housing assistance until her first paycheck. "I can't believe this is real," Angela said as they walked out of the office together. "This morning I was feeding pigeons in the park, and now I have a job helping other veterans." "Believe it," Marcus replied. "And Angela, you're going to be great at this." The hiring of Angela Foster marked a turning point for Second Chance's veteran services. Within 2 weeks, she had identified 15 female veterans who were either homeless or at risk of homelessness, a population that had been largely invisible to previous outreach efforts. She'd also designed a tracking system that allowed the organization to monitor the long-term success of their interventions. More importantly, Angela's success story began attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Local news stations started covering the organization's work, highlighting the unique approach of hiring formerly homeless veterans to help current ones. The stories resonated with viewers who hadn't previously understood the scope of veteran homelessness or the innovative solutions being developed. One morning, Marcus arrived at the office to find Susan practically vibrating with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, waving a letter. "We just received a major donation. A major donation." Marcus looked at the letterhead. It was from the Hartwell Foundation, one of the largest private foundations in the Midwest. The letter indicated they were prepared to provide a 3-year grant of $2.5 million to expand Second Chance's veteran services throughout Minnesota. "This is because of the news coverage," Susan explained. "They've been watching our work, and they want to fund a statewide expansion. We could help thousands of veterans instead of dozens." Marcus felt dizzy looking at the numbers on the grant proposal. It was more money than he'd ever imagined being associated with, enough to transform their small non-profit into a major force for change. "There's just one condition," Susan continued, her expression growing serious. "They want to meet with our key staff before finalizing the grant. Specifically, they want to hear directly from the veterans we've hired, you and Angela." Marcus felt his old anxieties creeping back. "Susan, I'm not good at presentations. I'm not the kind of person who talks to foundation executives." "Marcus, look at me," Susan said firmly. 6 weeks ago, you were convinced you had nothing to offer the world. Now, you've helped place nearly 30 veterans in stable housing and employment. You've prevented at least a dozen people from giving up entirely. You hired Angela, who has revolutionized how we track and follow up with our clients." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You are exactly the kind of person who should be talking to foundation executives. You're living proof that their investment will work." As Marcus walked home that evening, he reflected on the unexpected trajectory his life had taken. From a homeless veteran sleeping under a bridge to someone who might soon be presenting to major philanthropists, it seemed impossible, yet it was happening. He thought about Emma, who had visited the office that afternoon and proudly announced to everyone that Marcus was her hero. He thought about Tommy Brennan, who had started volunteering at the office on weekends, helping other veterans fill out paperwork. He thought about Angela, who had transformed from a park bench to a program coordinator in less than a month. All of these changes had started with one simple decision: to help a lost child find her way home. Marcus was beginning to understand that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones where you choose to act when it would be easier to walk away. The foundation meeting was scheduled for the following week. Whatever happened there, would determine not just the future of Second Chances Veteran Services, but the futures of thousands of veterans who were still waiting for someone to believe in their potential for recovery. Marcus knew he was ready for whatever came next. The morning of the Hartwell Foundation presentation, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the fourth time. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves exactly, but from the weight of what this meeting represented. In 3 hours, he would be sitting across from some of the most influential philanthropists in the Midwest, arguing for an investment that could change thousands of lives. Susan had arranged for the meeting to take place at the Foundation's headquarters in downtown Minneapolis, a gleaming 40-story tower that housed some of the city's most powerful financial institutions. The contrast with the shelters and encampments where Marcus usually worked wasn't lost on him. Angela arrived at the office early, looking professional in a borrowed suit that Susan had helped her select. Despite having been homeless just weeks earlier, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Her military bearing served her well in civilian leadership situations. "Are you ready for this?" Angela asked Marcus as they reviewed their presentation materials. "One final time. As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, though his stomach was churning with anxiety. Susan gathered the team for a final briefing. In addition to Marcus and Angela, they were bringing David Kim, their grants specialist, and Maria Santos, whose case management expertise would be crucial for explaining their service delivery model. "Remember," Susan said, "the Foundation has already decided they want to fund veteran services. Our job is to convince them that our approach is the most effective way to do it. They've seen the statistics and read our reports. What they want to hear today are the personal stories that demonstrate why our model works." The Hartwell Foundation occupied the entire 35th floor of the Meridian Tower. As the elevator climbed, Marcus watched the city shrink below them, thinking about all the veterans down there who were waiting for help that might never come. If this meeting didn't go well, the Foundation's conference room was intimidating, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city, a polished marble table that could seat 20 people, and walls lined with awards and photographs, documenting decades of philanthropic impact. 3 Foundation executives were waiting for them. Robert Hartwell III, the Foundation's president, was a distinguished man in his 60s who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of dollars. Jennifer Morrison, the program director, was younger but equally formidable, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail. The third person surprised Marcus, Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, who had introduced herself as a consultant specializing in veteran services evaluation. "Thank you for coming," Robert Hartwell said as they settled around the conference table. "We've been following your organization's work with great interest. The outcomes you've achieved in such a short time are remarkable." Susan began with an overview of Second Chances Veteran Services, explaining their philosophy of peer-to-peer support and their focus on hiring formerly homeless veterans as staff members. She presented statistics showing their success rates. Over 80% of veterans they'd housed were still in stable accommodations after 6 months, and nearly 70% had found employment. "Those numbers are impressive," Jennifer Morrison noted, "but what we're really interested in understanding is scalability. How do you replicate your success in other cities where you don't have the same personal relationships and local knowledge?" This was Angela's cue. She stood and moved to the presentation screen, clicking a slide showing organizational charts and training protocols. "The key is systematic mentorship," Angela explained. "In the military, we don't just throw new recruits into combat situations and hope for the best. We pair them with experienced personnel who teach them the skills they need to survive and succeed." She outlined her vision for expanding the program, regional training centers where newly hired veteran staff would learn counseling techniques, resource navigation, and crisis intervention. Experienced veterans like Marcus would serve as master trainers, developing standardized curricula that could be adapted to different local contexts. The advantage of our approach, Angela continued, is that veterans trust other veterans in ways they'll never trust civilian social workers, no matter how well-intentioned. When Marcus tells someone he understands what they're going through, it's not just empathy, it's shared experience. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Mr. Rodriguez, can you give us a specific example of how your military experience has informed your work with homeless veterans? Marcus had prepared for this question, but sitting in this intimidating boardroom, he found himself drawing a blank. The formal presentation he'd rehearsed seemed inadequate for what they were really asking. Instead, he found himself thinking about Tommy Brennan and the crisis that had nearly sent him back to the streets. 2 weeks ago, Marcus began, I got a call from a veteran named Tommy, who was having a PTSD episode triggered by construction noise near his apartment. He was ready to give up and go back to living rough because the sounds reminded him of incoming fire. Marcus described how he'd dropped everything to meet Tommy, how he'd listened without judgment, and how he'd used military language and concepts that Tommy could understand. I didn't try to explain away his fear or tell him to just tough it out. Instead, I treated it like a tactical problem that needed a tactical solution. What kind of solution? Robert Hartwell asked. We relocated him to quieter housing, but more importantly, we developed a strategy for managing his triggers. I taught him techniques we used in the field for staying calm under fire, breathing exercises, situational awareness, having exit strategies. But I also connected him with a therapist who specializes in combat trauma. Marcus warmed to his subject as he continued. The difference is that when I tell Tommy these coping strategies work, he believes me because he knows I've been in similar situations. When a civilian counselor tells him the same thing, there's always doubt about whether they really understand. Dr. Martinez was taking notes furiously. How do you measure the effectiveness of this peer counseling approach? Angela stepped back in, pulling up slides showing their tracking systems. We monitor multiple indicators: housing retention, employment status, mental health stability, substance abuse relapse rates. But we also track softer metrics that other programs often miss. She clicked a chart showing veteran engagement levels. Traditional programs have high dropout rates because veterans stop showing up for appointments or stop returning calls. Our veterans stay engaged because they're working with people who speak their language and understand their challenges. Jennifer Morrison studied the data carefully. What about cost effectiveness? How does your model compare financially to traditional approaches? David Kim fielded this question, presenting comprehensive cost analyses. Initially, our model appears more expensive because we pay competitive salaries to veteran staff rather than relying primarily on volunteers. But when you factor in the reduced recidivism rates and higher success rates, we're actually more cost-effective per successful outcome. Robert Hartwell sat back in his chair, considering what he'd heard. The numbers are compelling, and the approach makes intuitive sense. But I have one concern about scalability. Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Foster, you're clearly exceptional individuals who've overcome significant challenges. How do we ensure that other cities can find veterans with your level of commitment and capability? Marcus felt a surge of emotion at the question. 6 months ago, he would have been the last person anyone would have described as exceptional. The fact that these Foundation executives saw leadership potential in him was still difficult to process. Mr. Hartwell, Marcus said, with respect, I don't think Angela and I are exceptional. We're just veterans who were given an opportunity to use our skills and experience in service of something meaningful. He paused, gathering his thoughts. There are thousands of veterans out there right now who have the same leadership abilities, the same desire to help their fellow service members. They're sleeping under bridges and in abandoned buildings, convinced that they have nothing left to offer the world. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. The reason our model works isn't because Angela and I are special. It works because when you give veterans a chance to serve again, to use their training and experience to help others, they step up. That's what we're trained to do. Angela nodded emphatically. Marcus is right. Every city has veterans with leadership experience, with technical skills, with the kind of problem-solving abilities the military develops. They just need someone to believe in their potential and give them the tools to succeed. The room fell, silent as the Foundation executives absorbed what they'd heard. Marcus could see them exchanging glances, communicating in the subtle ways that powerful people do when making important decisions. Finally, Robert Hartwell spoke. I think we've heard enough to make our decision. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Had they said something wrong? Had they failed to make their case? Hartwell smiled for the first time during the meeting. Ms. Chen, Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Foster, congratulations. The Hartwell Foundation is prepared to fund your expansion plan in full. 3 years, $2.5 million with the possibility of renewal based on demonstrated outcomes. The room erupted in quiet. Celebration, handshakes, smiles, and expressions of gratitude. But Marcus found himself thinking about all the veterans who would benefit from this decision. Veterans who were probably sitting in shelters or under bridges at that very moment, unaware that their lives were about to change. As they prepared to leave the Foundation offices, Dr. Martinez approached Marcus privately. Mr. Rodriguez, I've been evaluating veteran service programs for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what you've built. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished. Marcus shook her hand, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, but this is just the beginning. As they walked out of the Meridian Tower and back into the streets of Minneapolis, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 7 weeks ago, he'd been a homeless veteran with no prospects and no hope. Today, he was helping to launch a statewide initiative that could transform the lives of thousands of veterans. The transformation hadn't been magic. It had been the result of hard work, dedicated support from people like Susan and Emma, and, most importantly, the willingness to believe that he still had something valuable to offer the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the complex process of expanding across Minnesota. But tonight, Marcus was going to call Tommy Brennan and Angela Foster and all the other veterans he'd helped, because he wanted them to know that their struggles had meaning, that their recovery was contributing to something larger than themselves. The kid who had been lost in the storm had led him to this moment. Now it was time to help other veterans find their way home. 6 months after the Hartwell Foundation meeting, Marcus stood in the conference room of Second Chances Veteran Services' new headquarters, looking out at a scene that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. The organization had moved into a renovated warehouse in the Midway district, with space for offices, training rooms, temporary housing units, and a full-service resource center. The walls were lined with success stories, photographs of veterans who had transitioned from homelessness to stable housing and employment, certificates from completed training programs, and thank-you letters from families whose lives had been transformed. But the most meaningful display to Marcus was a simple bulletin board near the entrance, covered with drawings and cards from Emma Chen, who had become the unofficial mascot of the entire operation. The expansion had exceeded everyone's expectations. What had started as a pilot program for 12 homeless veterans in Minneapolis had grown into a statewide network serving over 800 veterans across Minnesota. Regional offices had opened in Duluth, Rochester, and St. Cloud, each staffed primarily by formerly homeless veterans who had been trained in peer counseling and resource coordination. Marcus had been promoted to Director of Veteran Services, overseeing a team of 23 veteran staff members across the state. Angela Foster had become Deputy Director, responsible for training and quality assurance. Tommy Brennan had completed certification as a peer support specialist and was now running the Twin Cities Crisis Intervention Program. The statistics were impressive. A 92% housing retention rate, 78% employment placement success, and a recidivism rate that was less than half the national average. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real success was measured in the restored dignity of veterans who had rediscovered their sense of purpose and value. That morning's staff meeting had focused on a new challenge. The organization's success was attracting national attention, and they were receiving requests from veteran service organizations in other states who wanted to replicate their model. The Department of Veterans Affairs had approached them about potentially scaling the program nationwide. "I never imagined we'd be having conversations about national expansion," Susan said as the meeting concluded. "Marcus, you've built something truly remarkable here." Marcus shook his head. "We've built something remarkable. This was never a one-person operation." It was true. The success of Second Chance's Veteran Services was the result of dozens of people who had believed in the vision and worked tirelessly to make it reality. Susan had provided the initial opportunity and unwavering support. Angela had brought organizational expertise and strategic thinking. Tommy and the other veteran staff had proven that peer support could transform lives in ways that traditional social services couldn't match. But perhaps the most important contributor had been Emma Chen, now 8 years old and still visiting the office every week after school. Her childlike faith that everyone deserved help and kindness had inspired the entire organization to maintain their focus on treating every veteran with dignity and respect. The afternoon brought Marcus's favorite part of the week, intake interviews with new veterans entering the program. Each story was different, but they all shared common themes of service, sacrifice, and the struggle to find their place in civilian society. His 2 o'clock appointment was with James Harrison, a Navy veteran who had been living in his car for 3 months after losing his job as a security guard. James had the 1,000-yard stare that Marcus recognized from his own time on the streets, the look of someone who had stopped believing that things could get better. "James, tell me about your military service," Marcus began, using the approach that had proven most effective for building trust. For the next hour, James described his 6 years in the Navy, including deployments to the Persian Gulf and Mediterranean. He'd been a sonar technician, responsible for detecting underwater threats and ensuring the safety of his ship and crew. His technical skills were impressive, but civilian employers had been reluctant to hire someone with gaps in his employment history and no permanent address. "The thing is," James said, "I know I'm good at what I do. I never missed a contact when I was on sonar duty. Life depended on my ability to stay focused and alert. But try explaining that to some HR person who's never been more than 50 miles from their hometown." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "James, what if I told you that your sonar experience might be exactly what we need for a new program we're developing?" James looked skeptical. "What kind of program?" Marcus explained that Second Chances was partnering with several Minnesota companies to develop veteran-specific training programs that translated military skills into civilian careers. A new initiative with a logistics company was looking for veterans with technical backgrounds who could be trained in supply chain management and quality control. The company specifically requested veterans with sonar or radar experience because they understand the importance of attention to detail. And systematic monitoring, Marcus continued. It's a 6-week training program with guaranteed job placement upon completion. James sat up straighter, the first spark of hope Marcus had seen in his eyes. You're serious about this? Dead serious. The program starts next Monday, and it includes temporary housing during the training period. If you're interested, I can get you enrolled today. By the end of the meeting, James had completed his intake paperwork and was scheduled to begin the training program. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to Marcus. Why are you doing this? I mean, what's in it for you? Marcus had been asked. This question hundreds of times over the past months, and his answer had evolved as his understanding of his own motivations deepened. James, a year ago, I was exactly where you are now. Living rough, convinced that my life was over, that I had nothing left to offer the world. Someone gave me a chance to prove that wrong, and it changed everything. He paused, thinking about the night he'd found Emma in the storm. But the real reason I do this is because every veteran deserves the opportunity to serve again. You spent 6 years protecting our country's interests at sea. Now you have the chance to protect other veterans who are struggling to find their way home. James nodded slowly. When you put it like that, it sounds like a mission. It is a mission, Marcus replied, and we're always looking for good people to join the team. As evening approached, Marcus prepared to leave the office when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Susan's number, but her voice was more excited than he'd heard it in months. Marcus, you need to get over to the Henderson family shelter right away, she said breathlessly. Something incredible is happening. What's going on? Marcus asked, already reaching for his keys. Just get over there. You'll want to see this for yourself. Marcus drove across the city with growing curiosity. The Henderson family shelter held special significance for him. It was where he'd brought Emma that stormy night, where his transformation had really begun. He still volunteered there occasionally, helping with intake procedures and connecting homeless veterans with Second Chances services. As he turned onto the street where the shelter was located, Marcus saw something that made him pull over and stare in disbelief. A sleek private jet was parked in the shelter's parking lot, its engines still running. Ground crew members were unloading equipment while a small crowd of shelter staff and residents watched from a safe distance. Marcus parked and walked toward the shelter, where he found Patricia Williams standing outside with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Patricia, what's going on?" Marcus asked. "I have no idea," she replied. "About an hour ago, this jet landed in our parking lot. The pilot said they had permission, but I certainly didn't authorize it. Then this man in an expensive suit got out and asked to speak with you specifically." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Me? Are you sure? He knew your name, knew about the night you brought Emma here. He's been waiting inside for you to arrive." Marcus walked into the shelter's main room, where he immediately spotted the man Patricia had described. He was tall and distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. But what caught Marcus's attention was the expression on the man's face, one of genuine warmth and gratitude. "Mr. Rodriguez?" The man approached with an extended hand. "My name is William Chen. I believe you've met my daughter." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. "Dr. Chen's father?" "That's right. And Susan's grandfather-in-law. I've been wanting to meet you for quite some time." William Chen explained that he was the founder and CEO of Chen Industries, a multinational technology company with headquarters in Silicon Valley. He'd been following the success of Second Chances Veteran Services through Susan's reports and had decided it was time to take action. "Mr. Rodriguez, my granddaughter has told me many times about the night you saved her life. But more than that, she's told me about the work you're doing now, how you're helping other veterans find their way back to productive lives." Marcus was still processing the presence of a private jet in the shelter parking lot. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate you coming to visit, but I'm not here for a visit," William Chen interrupted gently. "I'm here to make an offer. Chen Industries has been looking for ways to expand our corporate social responsibility initiatives, particularly around veteran services. We want to partner with Second Chances Veteran Services to take your model nationwide." He gestured toward a briefcase that one of his assistants had placed on a nearby table. "We're prepared to provide initial funding of $50 million to establish Second Chances programs in 25 major metropolitan areas across the United States." Marcus sat down heavily in a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was hearing. $50 million, national expansion, the ability to help thousands of veterans across the country. "Mr. Chen, that's an incredible offer. But why? Why this much support for our organization?" William Chen's expression grew serious. "Mr. Rodriguez, on October 15th of last year, you made a choice. You could have walked past my granddaughter and continued with your evening. You could have assumed someone else would help her. But you didn't. You risked your own safety and well-being to make sure she got home safely." He paused, his voice becoming emotional. "That little girl is the most important thing in the world to our family. Because of your actions that night, she's safe, she's happy, she's continuing to grow up surrounded by people who love her." Marcus thought about Emma, about her weekly visits to the office, about her unwavering belief that the world was full of good people who just needed someone to care about them. "But this is about more than gratitude," William Chen continued. "Over the past year, I've watched what you've built with Second Chances. I've read the reports, studied the statistics, and talked to veterans whose lives you've transformed. You've created something that works, something that actually addresses the root causes of veteran homelessness rather than just treating the symptoms." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "This is a comprehensive plan for national expansion. We've identified target cities, potential local partners, and funding mechanisms that would allow Second Chances to become a permanent fixture in veteran services across the country." Marcus looked through the documents, seeing detailed analyses of veteran populations, homelessness statistics, and potential impact projections. The scope of what was being proposed was breathtaking. "There's one condition," William Chen said. "We want you to lead the national expansion. You would become the executive director of Second Chances Veterans Services, with responsibility for overseeing programs in all 25 cities." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the offer. A year ago, he'd been sleeping under a bridge, convinced that his life was over. Now he was being offered the opportunity to lead a national organization that could help tens of thousands of veterans. "Mr. Chen, I'm honored by your confidence in me, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something of this magnitude." William Chen smiled. "Mr. Rodriguez, you've already proven your qualifications. You've taken a small pilot program and turned it into a statewide success story. You've demonstrated that formerly homeless veterans can become effective leaders and advocates. Most importantly, you've shown that you never forget where you came from or the people who are still struggling." Just then, the shelter's front door opened and Emma Chen came running in, followed by Susan and Angela. Emma immediately spotted her great-grandfather and ran to hug him. But then she saw Marcus, and her face lit up even brighter. "Marcus, Grandpa William came to see you," she said, bouncing excitedly. "He told me he was going to help you help even more veterans." Marcus looked at this little girl who had changed his life simply by being lost in a storm. Her faith in the goodness of people had inspired him to rediscover his own capacity for service and leadership. "Emma," he said, kneeling down to her level, "what do you think I should do?" Emma considered the question seriously, her 8-year-old face scrunched up in concentration. Well, you always tell me that when we can help people, we should help people. And if Grandpa William wants to help you help more people, then that sounds like a really good idea. Marcus looked around the room, at Emma, whose simple kindness had started everything, at Susan, who had given him his first opportunity to serve again, at Angela, who had proven that recovery was possible for any veteran willing to accept help, at Patricia Williams, who had provided shelter during his darkest hour, and at William Chen, who was offering him the chance to expand their mission. Beyond anything he'd ever imagined. "Mr. Chen," Marcus said, standing up and extending his hand, "I accept your offer, but I have one condition of my own." "What's that?" Marcus smiled, looking at Emma. "We establish a program specifically for military families, with a focus on preventing family separation during times of crisis. No child should ever have to go through what Emma went through that night." William Chen's eyes filled with tears as he shook Marcus's hand. "I think that's a perfect addition to our mission." As the group discussed the details of the national expansion, Marcus stepped outside for a moment to process everything that was happening. The private jet sat in the parking lot like something from a dream, its presence a tangible reminder of how far his life had traveled from that stormy night when he'd found a lost little girl. He thought about all the veterans who were currently living on the streets, convinced that they had nothing left to offer the world. In a year's time, many of them might be running Second Chances programs in cities across America, helping other veterans find their way back to purpose and dignity. The transformation hadn't been magic. It had been the result of hard work, community, support, and the willingness to believe that everyone deserves a second chance. But it had started with a simple choice to help someone in need, even when helping meant risking his own safety and comfort. Emma appeared beside him, slipping her small hand into his. "Are you happy, Marcus?" Marcus looked down at this remarkable little girl, then back at the shelter where his new life had begun, then at the private jet that represented the incredible opportunities ahead. "Yes, Emma," he said softly. "I'm very happy. And I think a lot of other people are going to be happy too." As they walked back into the shelter together, Marcus reflected on the lesson that Emma had taught him that stormy night. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up when someone needs help. Everything else, the success, the recognition, the opportunity to make a larger impact, all of that flows from the fundamental choice to care about others, even when you think you have nothing left to give. The homeless veteran who had protected a lost child in a storm had become the leader of a national movement to end veteran homelessness. And it had all started with one decision to do the right thing, even when doing the right thing seemed impossible. The private jet would take Marcus to his new life, but he would never forget the bridge where his transformation began, or the little girl whose trust had reminded him that he still had something valuable to offer the world. In helping Emma find her way home, Marcus had found his way back to himself. And now, thousands of other veterans would have the chance to find their way home too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.